Lester?
All right, Gabe Gutierrez tonight, thank you. There is tragic news to report of the coronavirus pandemic. Sadly, news we have been braced for. America now surpassing 100,000 confirmed deaths from COVID-19. And tonight, new alarm about how many may be spreading the virus without symptoms. Here's Miguel Almaguer.
Tonight, as our nation struggles to protect public health and open the economy, a grim reminder of what's at stake and already lost. The U.S. coronavirus death toll now rising above 100,000. This map tracing the outbreak and its fatal explosive spread across the country. With roughly 1.7 million confirmed cases, a new poll finds 49% of Americans would get a COVID-19 vaccine if developed.
You probably need to get to probably 40% of people taking the vaccine. If you look at vaccination rates, about 45% of people seek the flu vaccine.
With Americans anxious to get back to work,
Everybody needs to survive.
2 new studies reveal insight into the virus. It's believed up to 80% of coronavirus cases may be asymptomatic. Those not showing symptoms shedding the virus for a shorter period of time. Doctors say the true indicator of trouble are spikes in hospitalization rates.
This is going to get bad if we aren't careful.
In Alabama, Dr. Michael Sag ran out of ICU beds 2 days ago.
We're left with the same type of concern that New York had, say, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, only we don't have the capacity that New York has or the resources to respond.
The ongoing struggle comes as Disney laid out plans to reopen July 11th, similar to those offered by Six Flags, calling for temperature checks, masks, and social distancing in line. With some restaurants taking reservations, tonight the CDC advises reduce seating and partitions between guests. Sam Brock is in South Beach.
On Ocean Drive in Miami Beach, restaurants for the first time today can serve diners on site, spreading out into the street to make it happen. But with hotels and beaches not opening for another week, the question is, will diners even come?
Across the country in Vegas, casinos are rolling the dice on opening their doors next week. While around Los Angeles today, some shops got back to business for the first time in months.
To get to Nordstrom. Yeah.
The nation's second largest school district is working on its plan to bring children back to campus in LA. It could include 16 kids to a classroom, children eating their lunch at their own desks, every child being given one ball to play alone, and staggered school days.
As our country moves forward, there is heartbreak in looking back. Cody Lister was so much more than just a number in today's grim milestone of lives lost.
Cody was the most kind, giving, compassionate, loving person you would ever meet.
The pain from one family, part of the collective grief of a nation. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News, Los Angeles.
As the nation marked that milestone, President Trump was in Florida for the SpaceX launch that was ultimately scrubbed by weather late today. And just in, the White House saying the president will sign an executive order concerning social media as he escalates his feud with Twitter. Here's Peter Alexander.
Ahead of today's scrubbed launch, President Trump touring NASA's campus, striking an uplifting note.
It's a great achievement for our country, and our country's #1.
Members of the president's family traveling with him wearing masks. The First Lady earlier seen wearing her mask aboard Marine One. Their visit coming the very day the country marks that tragic milestone, 100,000 lives lost to the coronavirus. And today the president hosted New York Governor Andrew Cuomo at the White House.
It was about how do we supercharge the reopening, especially in New York, which has been hardest hit.
No drama there, but the president is escalating another battle with Twitter after the company, for the first time, posted fact-check labels on a pair of the president's tweets about mail-in ballots. President Trump accusing Twitter of interfering in the 2020 presidential election, and today threatening to strongly regulate or close them down. A president has no authority to shut down a private company, and the First Amendment limits the government's ability to regulate free speech. Meantime, some top Republicans are telling President Trump to knock it off as he again today pushed a debunked conspiracy theory that former Republican congressman and Morning Joe host Joe Scarborough had something to do with the death of an aide in 2001. Lori Klasutis died after an abnormal heart rhythm caused her to collapse. and hit her head in Scarborough's Florida office. Scarborough was in Washington at the time. Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney.
We're in the middle of a pandemic. He's the commander-in-chief of this nation, and it's causing great pain to the family of the young woman who died.
As for SpaceX, late tonight, the president tweeted that he plans to fly back to Florida on Saturday for the next scheduled launch. Lester?
Peter Alexander at the White House, thanks. We're tracking the threat from tropical depression Bertha, bringing heavy rain and potentially life-threatening floods.
This is exactly what we saw today on southbound 101 at Alum Rock in San Jose, with one big exception, Kate, and that was it was daytime. Far more dangerous.
This just makes me so nervous seeing those people.
Far more concerning to see people do this in the middle of the night when it's dark and drivers may not see them. And you see a driver there on the right scooting through, just narrowly missing people in the street. So this is a much more dangerous, it's always dangerous, but much more dangerous than we saw on 101 when it was daylight.
Right. I mean, it's dark, and you even see it's dark for our helicopter, and thank goodness those cars stopped in time, because that traffic was moving very quickly when people hopped over that divider onto the other side of the freeway. So now you can see 880 traffic is stopped completely in both directions as the protesters pour onto the freeway from the streets of downtown Oakland, Dan. Boy.
Yeah, and they have stopped traffic, and we will see when and if police decide to respond to that particular spot on 880 and how long they allow the protesters to stay there. In San Jose, it was about an hour that they shut down the southbound direction of 101. And so we will see. But at least if there's a bit of good news here, the cars are stopped. You know, the protesters are in the street and no one's likely to get hit. When they first rushed out on the street, you're right, Kate, makes you terribly nervous. You see somebody there take a moment and zip through, which is, you can understand their frustration wanting to get out of harm's way, but it's also very dangerous.
A very dangerous situation in general here right now, unfolding as about almost an hour after this protest officially started. They gathered a group of several hundred people peacefully in front of City Hall, and then at about 8:20 they started moving through the streets. This car is just weaving through that crowd of people.
And we saw, I don't know if you saw, Kate, but somebody was trying to hit it from behind as they went by, obviously angry and agitated that they were getting through the crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw that happen in San Jose earlier when traffic was stopped on Highway 101 and someone came through with some sort of tool and smashed some of the rear windshields of cars there earlier in San Jose. We see, what does it look like? 4 cars there, 5 cars, 6, a whole line of traffic stopped on 880 right now as those protesters gather in an even larger group on now both sides of the freeway, which is what police and the CHP were trying to avoid, but they couldn't stop the crowd that pushed onto the freeway. Dan, you were watching earlier when this happened in San Jose. What ultimately took the protesters off the freeway?
You know, that was fascinating, actually, Kate, because there were several hundred protesters at the height of it on the freeway on that southbound 101 stretch of road by Alum Rock. And without real warning, and there was not a significant police presence on there at that time, about 2/3 of the group, about 200 people, left. And really was unclear what triggered them to leave, but they all sort of just left. And about 15 or 20 minutes later, the rest of them left. But we never saw police push them out of the way or confront them in any way. They may have told them that they had to move, and they did, but there was no line of police pushing them out of the way. So it's not really clear why they suddenly decided to move.
And Dan, I'm not sure that I'm seeing any police here telling the protesters to move, but they are moving across the freeway. Now it looks like they're walking down the freeway in the lanes of traffic. This is 880, both lanes, north and southbound at Jackson Street in downtown Oakland right now. Just about 5-10 minutes ago, protesters moved off the streets of downtown Oakland onto the freeway while traffic was moving very quickly.
And now they're walking in the opposite direction on the other side of the freeway, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. We've got traffic blocked on both sides, so they're moving, you know, where the cars aren't blocking those lanes.
Oh yeah, now they're moving exactly right in the other direction. They have blocked traffic and are walking down the freeway.
And this looks like a CHP unit that's pulled up. We'll have to see what they do, whether they try and just keep the crowd safe, whether they try and disperse the crowd. They're obviously moving in the opposite direction of the protesters, and someone's approaching them now.
pounding
banging on the
car.
back windshield of the police car. So you just have to hope that people stay safe in this very precarious situation. You can see the police car moving off of the freeway right now. Traffic completely stopped on 880 in both directions.
Well, and as we saw in San Jose today, with any luck, it won't replay itself here. As time goes on, tempers flare. People in traffic get frustrated that they're sitting in traffic. Protesters get more and more agitated, and the police do as well. And that's why you want to try to diffuse these things as quickly as you can, because the longer it goes on, the more likely it is that someone says something, throws a punch, throws a bottle, a police officer does something they shouldn't, and next thing you know, things erupt in a way that everyone hopes to avoid.
And Dan, now they're gathered, the protesters are gathered on the edge of the freeway on an overpass, it looks like, and they're holding up their signs. It looks like they might be cheering at other protesters that are on the street below them.
Yeah, that could be the case, Kate. You're right. If you look between the two road beds, there may be some people underneath, or they're just, yeah, there are some people. You're absolutely right. There's some people underneath that overpass there. Now, to where, they may not have any idea where they're going. You know, they may not even know. Looks like the people have lit some flares, some road flares, in the crowd, and you know, they may not even be aware of what their plan is. You know.
Absolutely. Again, well, you can see the crowd is moving, but they got on at Jackson Street in downtown Oakland, and you can see traffic is at least starting to move on one side, although it's moving, and it's, Dan, you know this is making me nervous. It's moving, and there's more protesters coming onto the freeway. So you also have to wonder, are all the drivers aware of what's going on in front of them? It's not something you usually expect to see people pop up in the middle of a freeway.
No, and you're right, it is nerve-wracking, isn't it, Kate, to watch. You just hope everyone is safe. Last thing we want is anybody hurt. Now somebody throwing a flare down at, it looks like the police officers below. And we understand, by the way, the 12th Street BART station, BART trains are not stopping. Of course, there haven't been many people on BART trains during this shutdown, so it's not affecting a lot of BART commuters at this, certainly at this time of day and in this time in our lives where BART has been down about 95% ridership. So the trains aren't stopping at the 12th Street station, but there are probably very few passengers on BART anyway. But you saw the flare. It looked like he threw the flare down to the next level at the police.
And then something sort of spun around, and you can see the Oakland Fire Department is arriving right now, obviously, to try and check on that and see what's going on. And then as that happened, protesters were moving back onto the other side of the freeway right there, as cars are still moving and stopping.
Some on bicycles, as you can see, some on foot.
We haven't seen, which is what we saw in San Jose earlier, besides the one protester banging on the back of the cop car, anyone, approach any of these cars that are stopped in traffic.
Yeah, which is a good thing. It's a good point.
Yes.
We have not seen, and one hopes that no driver shouts out anything or a protester shouts something and instigates something that ends up ending badly. But so far, they're just walking past the cars and leaving them alone, we think. Although these folks are getting awfully close to this car.
Someone right there in the middle of the screen on the upper left looked like they had a flare.
Yeah, that is a road flare. Exactly right, that you keep in the back of your car.
And then look at this right there on the on-ramp. It's a whole line of police cars flashing their lights. And then below them, the rest of the protesters on the streets moving through traffic towards the freeway, perhaps hopefully they'll stay off of it for the safety of everyone.
You see an Amazon truck.
Yeah.
Much in demand these days, the last 2 months, everybody ordering online. Those deliveries may be late.
Well, and that's what makes this whole night so incredible, is that we've all been sheltering in place. We've all been sort of in this pandemic together. And what happened in Minneapolis really set off a nationwide firestorm of anger.
And I think you and I talked about this, Kate. There's a great point. There's pent-up fear, anxiety. People have been restless. They've been cooped up for 2 months. Many have lost their jobs. There's economic stress. They haven't been able to do much. And then this incident involving George Floyd, this tragedy in Minneapolis, reignites that deep racial divide and that those feelings that have not gone away, but the last 2 months seem to have been subdued by the current crisis, and now it explodes across the country into acts of frustration and anger and disgust at a problem that America hasn't been able to shake.
Absolutely, and even though we have all been in this pandemic together, it certainly hasn't treated everyone equally. We know that minority communities have been particularly hard by COVID. Both the African American community and the Latino community here in the U.S. have really seen high rates, both of the virus and death rates. So,
very good.
While we have been in this pandemic together, we haven't really all been feeling it in the same way. And then, as you say, the tragedy in Minneapolis with George Floyd just obviously hit a nerve with so many people across the country. And we're seeing that play out here in the Bay Area, but also in New York, in Washington, D.C., in Atlanta, of course, in Minneapolis, we've seen incredible protests.
I think one in Tennessee today, if I'm not mistaken, a number of different places, there have been very, very spirited and in some cases violent protests. But it just all, Kate, reflects the deep division over race and the treatment that so many believe of African Americans by police in this country. And we want to point out, you know, most of the time, most police officers are good and decent people and work very hard, but there's always a few and things happen. But there is this sense that there's some systemic unfairness.
Absolutely.
And it sort of manifests itself in incidents like we saw with George Floyd.
Absolutely, and right now you're looking at live pictures from Sky 7 of protesters blocking Interstate 880. Just about, 20 minutes ago, they moved from the streets of downtown, jumped on the freeway while traffic was moving very quickly, narrowly missing cars. And you can see they've stopped cars. They've stopped a big rig just moments ago. We saw people standing in front of that truck with signs. And there they are, a very large crowd blocking all of traffic, so much so that it doesn't even look like those, I don't know if they're CHP or Oakland PD cars on that on-ramp. They're not even moving right now, and protesters are on both sides of the freeway, holding signs up, making sure that their message, their frustration about what's going on in this country is heard and seen. Not just by people on the freeway, but of course we've got our news helicopter overhead, and we've got people tuning in, and people are listening. People are seeing this.
Well, and as people are seeing this, absolutely, and they will see it not just here but around the country. You know, as we have seen protests and we've shown them on our air around the country, other places in this country will see the protests that took place today in San Jose and Oakland and understand that there is a sense of that common outrage and that common solidarity over this issue. One thing that we've seen here in Oakland, we certainly saw in San Jose, which I think, we said over the last couple of months, we're in this together, right, with the coronavirus. Yeah. What we saw in San Jose today, and here in Oakland too, from what I've seen, a very interesting, diverse group of people.
So that's a different fire. Right, yeah. That black smoke's not.
No, it's right here.
I think it came over.
No, it's not the same. That's my speaker.
This is much thicker, right? You see it's emanating.